3, 2. Good evening and welcome to Parent University. We are excited that everyone is here this evening joining us. Tonight's topic is going to be on how we help our children cope with anxiety during COVID. And we have some really great presenters this evening. I'd like to introduce who we have with us right now. We have Tana Burgos, and she is our Executive Director of Student Services with the school district. We have Janice Spratt. She is a counselor at Colinas del Norte Elementary School. We have Vicky Valles Mora, who is a counselor at Rio Rancho High School. And then we have our two presenters this evening. We have Shayna Clausen, and she is our statewide behavioral consultant with the Department of Health in the Office of School and Adolescent Health. And then we have Chris, who is he's a clinical psychologist and associate professor at UNM, and he does a lot of other things, and I'll let him tell you more about that when we get to the presentation. But I wanted to remind everyone how this works this evening. You're watching live via our YouTube channel, and so we'd like you to submit your questions in the comment section of the YouTube channel. We ask that you keep this section to questions only, and refrain from using it to comment or to have discussions, as we really want to make sure that we capture everyone's questions. We also ask that you keep your questions to the discussion being presented this evening. We know there's a lot of other questions out there. We do have an email account set up that you can send those questions to, which is Rio Rancho RRPS reentry plans at rrps.net. And we ask that you send those questions to that aren't pertaining to tonight's topic. And with that, we are going to go ahead and jump right into our presentation. And I am going to give the floor to Miss Shayna Clausen. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bethany. I'm really happy to be here with you all, and hopefully here to give you some really good information that will help you all as parents and community members. So like Bethany said, we're going to be discussing how we can help our children cope with anxiety during COVID-19. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I want to do a quick caveat here, just to remind everybody that this is not being considered group therapy. We're here as a resource for you, and this information is being brought to you as a resource. There will be lots of links, lots of resources that we've compiled for you all that we'll be referencing tonight, and you'll be able to access all of that on the Rio Rancho Public Schools website. So very briefly, if you have not heard of the Office of School and Adolescent Health, we do sit within the New Mexico Department of Health, and we work in conjunction with the Public Education Department. We work with folks who work with kids, and we consider children up to the age of 24. We really focus on educating and supporting our folks who work with children throughout New Mexico, and we are statewide, and we do have specific regional staff as well. We provide training, technical assistance, support, crisis response, all of that type of stuff to folks who need it. We provide those services to the individual who work with kids, but we do also provide trainings to youth as well. And all of the things that come out of the behavioral health section of the Office of School and Adolescent Health is evidence-based. We promote evidence-based practices to improve health, wellness, and the resiliency of youth. Next slide, please.
Okay, and I'll take it from here for just a moment. So as Beth mentioned, my name's Chris Morris. I'm a psychologist with UNM Department of Psychiatry, but my main job at UNM is to direct the UNM Behavioral Health Clinic right here in Rio Rancho. It's where I am right now. And our clinic serves adults as well as adolescents age 13 and up. We provide individual and group therapy, substance use disorders treatment. We do provide psychiatric medications for individuals where that's appropriate or needed. And so we really focused on providing effective treatments for behavioral health challenges that are based on evidence. We're located right next to City Hall at 2600 College Boulevard. The phone number is right there. We are accepting new folks for counseling therapy as well as medication, and the number's right there. For younger children, there are other resources available in the area, and that is going to be on the website. There's a thorough resource list of behavioral health options, both here in Rio Rancho as well as a few selected resources over in Albuquerque. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So let's start off talking just a little bit about stress, something everybody's familiar with, everybody has experienced. And we throw that word around a lot. I'm stressed. I am so stressed. There's so much stress right now. But what do we really mean by that word? Well, there's two main types of stressors. There's physical stressors, which are those immediate kinds of disruptions or threats to our physical well-being. Hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain, injury, illness, those kinds of things. And then there's mental stressors, and these are sometimes obvious and sometimes not so obvious. They can be kind of hard to pinpoint at times, but these are disruptions to our mental or emotional well-being. So when there's conflicting or unmet needs, when we're dealing with time pressures, who hasn't experienced that, right? Difficult relationships, whether it's a family relationship or a relationship at work or school, those are stressful for us. And if you think about it, difficult relationships often connect back to that idea about conflicting or unmet needs, right? There's something happening in that relationship, whether it's with our boss or our teacher or our family member or whoever. There's something going on where our needs are not getting met, or there's a conflict. We need two different things, and we can't have it both ways, for example. So mental stressors can also relate to tasks or goals or problems that we're dealing with. You're trying to get something accomplished and you can't, or there's something in the way. That's stressful, right? So, but the reason why it's stressful depends really uniquely on the individual. What's important to you? What's important to you might be very difficult from what's important to me. And so if I can't get that thing done, it's not very stressful for me. But if it's important to you and you can't get it done, it's very stressful to you. So stress is unique to the individual. Stress is a natural thing. It's a part of life, right? It's not all bad. It motivates us to get things done, right? When there's a problem or an unmet need, well, what do? We figure it out. We do something, right? We try to move forward with it. So it's a motivator. The problem arises when stress is extreme or prolonged. There's not a way to resolve it. There's not a way to move forward. That can cause serious problems. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what are some of the effects of extreme or prolonged stress? We can think about it in terms of the impact on our body, our mind, our emotions, or our behavior. And you can see here in the diagram examples of what some of those impacts can be. So feeling very worried, having trouble concentrating, having trouble making decisions, just thinking really negatively, right? And many of us, if you think over the course of your life, you've had a job that was just so stressful for you for whatever reason. It may have had to do with the nature of the work itself, your tasks that you had to do. It may have had to do with your boss. It may have had to do with coworkers. It could have to do with the location, right? I've had jobs where I've had to travel all over to different parts of New Mexico. I'm driving for hours and hours. I'm away from my family. That's stressful, right? And so it can be hard to concentrate. We're worried, we're preoccupied with these problems that we're encountering. In terms of our behavior, we can really see some changes in behavior. How much you're eating, how much you're sleeping, your ability to get to sleep, right? Or things that we do to try to deal with the stress. Perhaps having more alcohol than you might usually have, or perhaps smoking more, right? Thinking about difficulty concentrating and focusing can make you more accident prone. Things start to go wrong. You make mistakes because it's hard to concentrate. Then that crosses over into some of the emotional impact, losing confidence, feeling irritable, right? Feeling apprehensive, feeling worried, feeling cut off, or just that feeling of, I just don't care anymore. apathy. Now, stress also has a major impact on our body, and this is because, of course, stress is a natural part of life, and so our systems within our mind and body are designed to respond to stress, but not constantly, not at constant high levels. And so the impact of extreme or prolonged stress also shows up in the body. Headaches, lowered immunity, getting sick more, muscle tension, right? Who hasn't experienced that? Just being worn out. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's shift a little bit then from stress to anxiety. Again, a term that we use a lot. I'm anxious, I'm having anxiety. What does that really mean? So anxiety, the definition is just that we're having a reaction, a response to a threat or a danger, some type of disruption. But that response that we're having is maybe somewhat unrealistic or out of proportion to what's actually going on around us. So we've all experienced this. You've got an important event coming up, maybe a big family event, you're getting married. Think about getting married. It's this wonderful, joyous occasion, right? But we get so anxious if you're married and you think back to that day. How are you feeling in the days leading up to that? Probably pretty tense. So this is a great example of where that tension, that apprehension, it's sort of disproportionate to the actual situation. Even a big exam or a job interview, if you get anxious about something like that, well, what's the worst that could happen, right? We can sit here now in our chairs and think about it like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? But when you're in that time leading up to a big test or an interview or something similar, it's hard to step back and think realistically about it at times. So what are some of the common signs of anxiety? Heart rate goes up, breathing maybe gets rapid or shallow, or maybe it's a little hard to breathe, feel kind of short of breath. Maybe lightheaded, sweating. Think about being tense or anxious in a job interview, right? You're hoping they don't notice that your palms are sweating. Maybe you get that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, maybe feel kind of nauseated, kind of sick, muscle tension, headaches, restlessness, when anxiety persists, trouble sleeping, and then of course fatigue follows from that, right? If you're not sleeping right. On the more emotional and mental side, feeling worried, feeling irritable, feeling impatient, having trouble concentrating, making decisions, avoidance. If something's scary or threatening to us, what do? Well, we stay the heck away from it, right? So that's where procrastination can come in as part of anxiety. So important to remember that temporary anxiety is normal. We all experience it. But if it's occurring frequently or persistently, it can really be disruptive in a person's life. So one of the most important things to remember about anxiety is that there's many things we can do to reduce or improve anxiety, to prevent it from becoming a problem. Or if it has become a problem, there's ways to come back from that. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go one more step further, and then we're going to start talking about some solutions and ways that we can recognize anxiety and what we can do about it. But people will frequently ask, well, what if it's more than stress? What if it's more than that occasional anxiety? How do I know if this is really something that is a serious mental health problem? So this at a glance just gives you that criterion. If it's persistently affecting a person's thinking, emotions, and behavior, and if it's disrupting a person's ability to engage in those important life activities. So if we're adults, it's usually work. If we're younger, it's usually school. We've all got our daily activities that we need to do every day, whether it's at home, work, school, our relationships, our chores, and our tasks. And then our relationships, right? If it's disrupting relationships, if a person's withdrawing or is irritable all the time, and it's having an impact on those important relationships, then this might be something to be more concerned about. And it's important to note that anxiety disorders are pretty common. 2 out of 10 adults every year in the US experience an anxiety disorder. 3 out of 10 children and teens. So it's even more common among children and young people than it is among adults. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit specifically about how this shows up for children. I've been talking so far in a general sense. All people, kids, adults, that's generally what anxiety looks like. But in children, there are some significant differences. And one of the most important things to remember about children who are experiencing these kinds of difficulties is that they show it most through how they act, through their behavior, their actions, not so much always in what they say. They may not say much specifically at all about feeling tense or anxious. They may not even really quite realize it, especially with younger children, but it shows up in their behavior. So we can see that right here on the screen. What kinds of behavior would you see in young children, preschool aged, who are experiencing anxiety or excessive stress? They might be afraid of being alone. They're having bad dreams. With young children, you may see that their speech abilities went to a certain point and now it seems to be going back, right? Their communication, their language isn't quite at the level that it was. Or they've just stopped improving. You know, a 3 or 4-year-old, we should be seeing their language abilities increasing. Gosh, you know, almost day by day sometimes. You can't believe with the things that they come out with, right? But you notice that that's stopped and they don't seem to be moving forward the way that they were. Again, a way that you might see regression is that, you know, 3 or 4-year-old generally has pretty good control over toileting functions, but you see that they've slipped up a little bit on that and they seem to be going backwards perhaps. Changes in appetite, more whiny or clinging behaviors, more temper tantrums. So their emotions seem to be getting out of control. They don't seem to be able to handle themselves too well in a variety of situations. So what do we do? With younger children, well, the first thing is to realize, okay, I'm seeing some of these signs, there's something going on. So to really try to step back and be more patient. Right? When a child's doing well, we're maybe trying to challenge them, helping them to grow, giving them more, putting new rules and new expectations on them as they get older. That's very appropriate. But if you see some of these things are going on, you have to think, okay, slow down. It's time to be more patient and not add additional expectations at this time. Provide reassurance, and that can be in words or it can just be through simple touch. And you know your child, what kind of touch is helpful to them. It may be just sitting next to them on the couch a little more often, sitting down close, or an arm around the shoulders, or maybe it's more hugs, right? Whatever it is that fits for you and your child. Encourage that expression through play, through activities. Remember that kids communicate through their behavior. Sometimes they will tell you the story, and encourage that with open-ended kinds of questions like, well, tell me the story about what happened, right? Or what if they start to tell you something, and even if it's kind of pretend, it doesn't seem very real, but they're telling you something. Ask that open-ended question. Well, then what happened? What happened next? Any thoughts about this so far, Shayna?
I totally agree. You know, being the mom of a 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, I absolutely look for these things. And I think, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but a prelude to it is stopping and breathing ourselves as parents or as educators or as school staff or whoever we are, stopping and breathing before we do respond. Because most of us, and I'll speak for myself, but as a parent and as a mom, we have natural reactions that we go to, right? We see a behavior, we react to that. And so it's remembering, and or I will add, we see a behavior and we react to it based on our assumptions. And our assumptions may not be correct because, like Dr. Morris alluded to, they may be telling us a story about little green aliens or monsters coming into their room at night, right? And we go, oh, no, that didn't happen. There's no monsters, right? But there's something to that story. And so it's stopping and looking at the behaviors through a different lens, especially when they're this little. Because when they're little, we think, well, we're the adult, we know everything. But there's something to the behavior. So really stopping, listening, and looking through that mental health lens at those behaviors instead of just reacting.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So really thinking about, well, what does my child need? There's different things happening right now, and they're acting differently. They're telling me what they need through their behavior. So an example of that is sleeping arrangements. Maybe they're saying, oh, I want to sleep with you, or oh, I want to sleep back in, where I used to sleep when I was little, or whatever. They're wanting that closeness, that reassurance. And so this is the kind of thing that it's okay to allow this temporarily if it's practical in your home. Another thing about sleep and bedtime is have calming, comforting, wind down kinds of activities before bedtime. Try to have a regular bedtime routine and try to include those things that are calming and comforting. So rather than having the TV on still and whatever revved up thing is on TV, think of something that's quieter, calmer, turn on some music, time to read a story. Or if the TV is going to be on, just pay careful attention to what it is that's on and have it be something that is more calming and quieter. Maintain regular family routines. Now, I said it may be okay if you realize that your child is sort of not progressing or developing as much as they were, or they seem to be kind of paused in that it's okay to allow that when there's a lot of stress going on. But maintaining regular family routines is a way to begin building those expectations back in a way that's actually going to be very helpful for your child. It's the predictability and the structure that reduces the amount of stress that they're experiencing. Remember, stress has to do with these difficult problems that are hard to resolve or solve. Well, when we have routine and predictability, those difficult problems sort of recede more into the background because there are things that do make sense. There are lots of more things that are doable when you have that predictable, regular family routine. And it's also that chance for you to help your child get back on track with some of the expectations that maybe they haven't been doing so well on because of the stress and anxiety that they're experiencing. And last but definitely not least, be careful about media exposure. Of course, we all want to keep up on what's going on. We need to check the news and whatnot, but be careful about what your child is exposed to, right? The media is designed for big people, right? And so just be cautious about that and be aware of what's on when your child is around and what they're absorbing. Okay, next slide. Okay, children a little bit older, elementary school ages. Again, we can see that idea of like they seem to be acting younger than they ought to be, or younger than they were acting just a little while ago, or they've stopped progressing. They seem to have stopped maturing. So you may see more whining, or maybe just that irritable or aggressive behavior, acting out in an angry way. Maybe nightmares, maybe being clingy again, other kinds of sleep disturbance, not wanting to get up or having trouble getting to sleep at night, not eating the same, too much or too little. For children around this age, emotional distress shows up a lot through physical complaints. Headaches and stomach aches are the classic, right? So Shayna, what thoughts do you have about how to respond to those kind of complaints?
So I'll use an example with my own kiddo. We had a fire in our neighborhood where our neighbor's house unfortunately burned down. Everybody was okay. And my son heard it because we're right next door. So we had some stuff going on. And what he would tell me is that he would tell me, my throat has fire in it. My throat feels funny. And I'm thinking you have strep throat. And of course, I mean, we're in a pandemic. So yeah, your head goes there and all of that type of stuff. And at the same time, and my husband's like, well, did you eat something funny? Or, we start trying to decode the situation. But in his way, that was him explaining. And after using those open-ended questions, like Dr. Morris asked, of trying to dig a little bit deeper, he told me, well, my tummy feels funny, my throat feels funny. And once getting through it, what he was trying to tell us, he had that lump in his throat, like he wanted to cry, right? Because he was thinking about the fire. And so it took us a while to get there. And again, I want to highlight that number one thing there in the how to help box, just to jump forward a little bit, is that patience, tolerance, and reassurance. We jump to conclusions. We want to fix it. They are our children, right? And as adults, we want to fix it. We want to help. And we can do that. But the first step is to really identify what's going on and not just treat what you see on the surface, right? You've got a stomach ache, let's take something, drink some milk, right? Let's dig a little bit deeper into it. I don't know if there's any school nurses joining us, but I'm sure they're shaking their heads as well, because my goodness, how many times does a school nurse see a kid because they have a headache or a stomach ache? And it's really important to look through this from a holistic, whole health perspective. The mind and the body are connected, wholeheartedly connected, and really they can very clearly affect each other. So when your child is experiencing anxiety, worry, stress, a lot of times that comes out in physical reactions.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned those open-ended questions, which can be so key when your child's expressing some of these things. By all means, you could say, well, let's get a glass of milk. Sometimes that helps with an upset tummy. And then sit down with them, while they drink the glass of milk. And, tell me what's going on with you, what's happening. Just open-ended, right? What's been going on? And see what comes and just encourage that. So, and that can be, sometimes you may have an idea about what you think the stress is. Oh, it's this school thing, it's the school being online. And so you may ask sort of a leading question if you have an idea of what it's about, or you could just stay totally open-ended if you're just really not sure. Let them tell you. So again, structure is important. So structured household chores, meaning like, okay, I'll do this while you do that, right? And give them 2 or 3 steps to follow in terms of a chore. So keeping it structured, and structure is helpful sort of across the board. Keeping a household schedule as much as you can. I mean, things are crazy. We all get that. But trying to keep some kind of a routine in the face of all the disruption that we're all experiencing. Set those limits, because part of what you'll see with children this age when they're feeling upset, anxious, stressed, is they're looking for solutions too, right? So they're going to go off in this direction or that direction to test it, to see if it helps, to see what you'll do. And so be sure to keep those limits in place, gentle but firm. What else? Encourage that expression through play, through arts and crafts, games. Physical exercise is great. It's a great stress reliever. Send them outside. If you can, go outside with them. Again, thinking about the media exposure. Children this age are going to have their own exposure to media. You can't control all of that. And so encourage them to talk about what they're seeing and what they're hearing. That's another conversation. If they have particular concerns about something they're hearing, and maybe there's more than one side to every story, you may not have all the answers, but just help them to know that, yeah, well, maybe none of us has all the answers, but here's some things we can do at home. Here's some things we can do in our family to be okay, to deal with the situation. Other thoughts, Shayna?
I don't. So on that one, I think the only other thing I wanted to highlight is, that physical activity is so, so, so important. Again, mind, body, soul, right? So I know that there is, and I can attest to this, a huge physical component within online learning. We're worried, right? Our kids are sitting in front of a computer. They're retaining information virtually, which is tough. And so making sure that there's time, and I have to attest and just praise the teachers in Rio Rancho Public Schools who are doing a phenomenal job. And even in the middle of a live meet saying, okay, let's just stand up, stretch break, move around. We're going to jump and count in the same time or whatever it is. And really make sure that we're encouraging that. And then when you have a break, get them outside, get them moving around, or, using a fidget toy, which I'm using right now because it's what I do, because I can't pace while I'm teaching because I'm sitting down, right? Having these things to be able to get that energy out through a physical manner is incredibly important.
Great. Next slide. Okay, older kids, teenagers. Again, we're going to expect to see some of that stress show up in physical symptoms. Headaches, rashes, acne, my face is breaking out. How come it got so bad? I didn't change anything in my routine. It could very likely be stress, right? Sleep and appetite disturbances, watch for that. Teens need more sleep. So if they're sleeping 9-10 hours a night, that's okay. But if it's much more than that or much less than that, it's something to be checking into with them. A big increase or a big decrease in energy. They're not their usual self, or they don't seem to care about things the way they used to. Isolating. So it's one thing, it's natural for teens to want to have privacy, right? They're getting older, they're aware of themselves, and they want to have their own privacy. But if they don't want to be around anybody ever, then that's a concern, right? That's isolating. They may have concerns about stigma or injustices. Teens are starting to think about the world. They're starting to think about what do they see as right or wrong. And so when there's big events happening in the world, they have those kinds of concern. Not wanting to participate in school, avoiding school, missing school. School is their work, right? And when we're not doing well, what happens? Well, we sometimes call in sick to work. We have trouble getting to work on time or getting there at all. School is their work, right? So they start having trouble getting there. They start having trouble doing it. So ways to help with that, again, be patient, reassure them, all right, we're in this together, we can get through this, there's a way. Keep the structure, keep the routines. If they're struggling with a normal routine, okay, let's talk that through, let's problem solve, what's a way to make it a little bit more doable, but try to keep that structure. That's going to be helpful. That predictability helps us deal with stress. Again, talk about it. This talks specifically about the COVID outbreak, the pandemic, but whatever that stressor is, they might be less concerned about COVID and more concerned now about school and what's going to happen with this year, right? Think about freshmen, think about seniors. It's a big year for them, right? So talk about that. Help them stay in touch with friends. If people can't get together physically, there's ways to do that. Physical distancing doesn't mean physical isolation. Help them find those ways to be connected. Again, thinking about media, thinking about that exposure. What are they looking at online? Spend some time with them looking at stuff or asking them, tell me about what you're seeing, show me, let's talk about it. I'm interested. Act interested, like you really want to hear about what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and what they're thinking. Other thoughts, Shayna?
I think to wrap up with all of the ages, what we're looking at is a change in what would be typical behavior. We know our kids, and we know what general typical developmental behaviors we should be seeing within those. But of course, with knowing our kids, we're looking at a change in that. So we call that baseline behavior, right? That's typical functioning. we're looking for changes in that baseline behavior, and investigating those, because sometimes those changes are totally fine. But like Dr. Morris said, it's sitting down with them and saying, hey, let's go through this. Tell me more about this, with those open-ended questions, and really just keeping an eye out with all of these ages for that change in what we would consider typical behavior.
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So like Dr. Morris talked about, we saw a lot of different reactions. So we know that children's responses and ours are different, right? They're different to stressful events. Some examples listed here for you, like we talked about. They may be clingy, they may be restless, they may have difficulty with self-care, eating or sleeping, or want that extra attention. When these new behaviors crop up, we know that they're natural responses, right? So we as adults can help by showing empathy and patience and calmly setting limits. I will tell you right now, as a professional and as a parent, that's hard to do. That's hard to do sometimes, right? And so I will say it again, and probably 3 or 4 more times before we end today. It's stopping and taking a breath before we respond to those behaviors, and maybe changing the way that we look at those behaviors. Next slide. So here we are, right? So what's the difference between responding and reacting? So when we react, we see the thing and we automatically have an emotional, physical reaction to it, and we go, right? What are we missing in between? We're missing the thought process, right? We're missing, okay, let me take in the behavior that I'm seeing and think about this for a second. Is this defiance, or is there something going on underneath, right? So we know that behaviors can be frustrating as adults. I taught this very specific thing. My entire background has been in residential treatment centers for adjudicated offenders. And yes, those behaviors are on the extreme side of things, but it's the same thing, right? When we react in a negative way, whether we snap at the child or we just give them a consequence right away, that increases the behavior, it increases the anxieties. Reactions only make the behavior and underlying cause of the behavior more intensified. So instead of reacting, take that deep breath, and we want to respond to the need instead of the behavior, right? All behavior reflects needs. So when we think at the end of the day, we're sitting at the table trying to do our work, trying to do our kids' homework or whatever, and we start to slouch a little bit and we're exhausted and we're yawning, those are behaviors, right? And those behaviors reflect a need, right? The need is that I'm tired. I need to do something for myself to perk up my energy, right? Or maybe I need to sleep. So we want to look at our children's behaviors the same way. And instead of reacting to the behavior, let's try to identify what the need is for that behavior. So I'll give you an example. Behavior, we see irritability and whining. Okay, we'll use a 5-year-old, for example, because that's my expertise at the moment. So 5-year-old is irritable and just kind of not happy with everything, and they're whining. A negative reaction, right? Stop whining. You're being annoying. Go find something else to do, right? We just snap and we're like, oh, that behavior is driving me crazy. Go away. Don't do that, right? What did we just do to that child? We increased whatever anxieties and stressors were going on within that child. And 9 times out of 10, that behavior is probably not going to stop, and it's probably going to get worse, or it might morph into something much more serious, okay? Instead of that negative response, what is that positive response, right? Stopping, taking that breath. What need is not being met in my child right now? Okay, they're irritable, they're whining. Well, maybe they're feeling unsure about something, right? Something's just, they're not feeling secure. So I need to be patient. I need to provide reassurance. And maybe I respond with something like, it sounds like you're feeling a little uneasy right now. Come talk to me. Let's sit down for a minute. And especially with one that little, that sitting and talking generally is around play. And play therapy is incredible. I am not a clinician, but from my experience, being able at that age to play that game and start talking at the same time and start digging out those needs and what's going on through play. Dr. Morris, anything you want to add?
No, I think your point is a great one, that play is a great avenue for children of any age. Now, adolescents play differently than 6-year-olds, but whatever they like to do, if it's a teen, it may be going out and shooting baskets, or it might just be taking a walk, or maybe it's doing a task together. Maybe it's going out and doing some work in the yard, or I was cutting wood with my grandson this past weekend, and we had a bunch of good talks while we were cutting firewood. So whatever is the play, whatever is the activity that fits for you with your child, that's a great opportunity to get some things kind of out in the open and talk it through and help them come to some ideas about, well, how do I help myself to feel better? What can I do to move forward from this situation, or what's going on with me? With the younger child, it's less about talking and it's more about just the play itself. So they might actually act some things out, like Shayna and her story about the monster. Well, what does that monster really represent? And you don't have to come right out and say that to the child, but you just sort of play along, be a part of it, and see if you can help them get towards something that's satisfying or calming or solves the problem. Think about little kids' shows and the little shows that they may watch. There's some problem always in the show, right? And then the little characters, they work together and they figure it out. And at the end, it's all solved. Well, if life were only that simple, right? It was a 20-minute kids show, but that's the idea. How do we work through it to a little solution?
Absolutely. Thank you. Next slide. So resiliency. At the end of the day, resiliency is extremely important, right? Um, I am a survivor of childhood and adolescence, right? I have survived. I've made it to adulthood. I am resilient. And when so many things are going on, it's easy to get caught up in the stress, the worries, those negative thoughts, like Dr. Morris talked about. But what we have to remember is that we and our children are resilient. So resiliency is that process of bouncing back and adapting in that face of adversity and significant stress or trauma, right? So adverse circumstances or negative circumstances don't have to lead to bad outcomes. They don't. And that's an assumption that sometimes we make as society, of bad things happen and then we're going to have negative outcomes. Even in the face of those negative things, we can look at our own lives and identify what aspects of my life do I have control over. As an adult, I ask myself that on a daily basis, right? What aspect of this situation right now do I have control over? It's much easier when we can look at that in that way, because then the issue doesn't seem so big. We can do that with our children as well, right? People change their perspective and grow from these challenges, right? We come out on the other side and we come out stronger. Resiliency not only helps us bounce back, but it helps facilitate empowerment and emotional growth. Resiliency is an incredible thing. And we see children and individuals who have faced adversity and came out the other side with incredible growth and incredible resiliency. So it's something to remember, and it's something that we need to keep in the back of our brains instead of getting stuck in that, negative thought whirlwind. So along the lines of resiliency, let's go to the next slide. I want to talk about, how can we be resilient? And one of my favorite acronyms in the world, and I'm not being selfish about this, but one of my favorite acronyms is MAMA. And MAMA stands for meaningful activity and meaningful adults. Everybody needs their MAMA, and every child needs a meaningful activity and a meaningful adult. Now, this can look different depending on who that child is, what their circumstances are. I had a kiddo that I worked with in a facility, and their meaningful adults happened to be the PE teacher at the facility that we were at. That was his meaningful adults. And his meaningful activity was basketball every single day. And that was incredibly important and crucial to his resiliency. So we want to ensure the presence of a sensitive and responsive caregiver. That does not always have to be a parent or caregiver figure. It could be a teacher. It could be somebody from the school. It could be somebody from the community, a faith leader, a mental health professional, a doctor. I could go on forever, a coach. It could be anybody, right? But it's about that individual being sensitive and responsive. The primary factor in recovery from stress of trauma is the presence of that supportive, caring adult. We know this. We've seen this throughout our research around trauma, that resiliency happens when that individual has a supportive, caring adult in their life. And again, this could be any adult. That adult needs to also take care of themselves, because if my tank is empty and I have nothing to give, I can't then assist that child that needs me. So that child's well-being depends on the well-being of their parents and their caregivers. And working in the mental health field, we talk about self-care, and then everybody rolls their eyes and they go, yeah, I know, self-care, got to take care of myself, go for a walk, listen to some music, blah, blah, blah. But really think about that. What is self-care for me? I have a job to do, right? I've got 2 little boys and a family that depend on me. And my tank has got to be full for them so I can be that meaningful adult, right? So I need to take care of myself. We need self-care ensures that those internal resources are there for us to be able to give to others. And sometimes that's just staying connected. Sometimes that's me calling my friend and saying, hey, let's FaceTime for a little bit, right? And just getting that out, especially because we can't see each other in person, right? Restorative activities, whatever that is for you, and, healthy restorative activities. And seeking help from a mental health provider when that struggle and high stress gets too much. Addressing the stigma. Sometimes there is stigma. We know that there's stigma around mental health, right? But knowing that there are mental health providers out there, Dr. Morris being an incredible example of one, who they're accessible. Even in a time like this where we may not be able to physically go see somebody, we're doing virtual visits where they are accessible. And again, we're going to give you a ton of resources about how to access these resources and these mental health professionals within the community, virtually, even outside of our community, to be able to support ourselves. Because remember, we can't give anything if we're drained, right? Next slide. So we want to create a safe physical and emotional environment. How do we do this? We do this with the 3 R's, and we've talked about some of this. We want to reassure, we want to focus on routines, and we want to support regulation. So let's look at what that looks like. So we want to reassure children about their safety and their safety of the loved ones, right? I'll stick with the example of my son, worried about the house next door, right? We want to reassure him of the safety. This was before the pandemic. What we did, we took a trip down to the fire station and we met our local firefighters in our community. And that was so reassuring for him. We figured out ways that reassure him, even in his room, which I'm sitting in right now. And there's a big old picture of a fire truck in his room. That's reassuring for him, right? That I'm safe, right? Having those activities that we do together. He helps me and dad set the house alarm when we go to bed. That's a reassuring activity for him, right? So things that ensure his safety. Routine. We talked about this. Dr. Morris talked about this. Having a sense of predictability is incredibly important. That routine is vital. And I want to highlight something that Dr. Morris said too, which I think is incredibly important, is sometimes that routine stops working for the family or it stops working for the kid. That's okay. Let's make a new routine. Let your child have a say in that routine. What would you like to do before bed? And, my child says, I want to go ride my bike around the neighborhood. Okay, maybe we can do that at a different time of day. Let's read a story about bikes instead, right? So letting them have a say in that, but that routine is absolutely incredibly important. And adults need to support children's development of regulation. So when children are stressed, we heard this before, their bodies respond by activating that stress response system. We hear sometimes kids says, I'm scared. We say, oh, there's nothing to be scared of. You don't need to be scared, right? Let's change the way we're reacting to that and respond in a way of, well, I could understand how that might feel really scary and overwhelming for you, right? Because just because we want to reassure, let's validate, right? Let's validate, because we may not think that child needs to be scared. There's no monsters in your room, but there's something underneath that. So let's start with that reassurance and validation. We want to encourage self-regulation activities. We talked about a lot of these: exercise, deep breathing, mindfulness and meditation activities. And yes, even little ones can do that. Regular routines for sleeping and eating. All of these are examples of self-regulation activities. So remember your 3 R's: reassure, routines, and regulation. Next slide. So what can parents and caregivers do to help our kids? We talked about this before. We're going to highlight it again. We want to help our children stay active. Set that time in your schedule to go outdoors, get some fresh air, get some physical activity. It is wonderful for physical and mental health. Even if it's taking the dog for a walk, which we're all doing right now, take the dog for a walk, go for a bike ride, go play in the backyard, whatever it is, get outside and get that physical activity. You can use indoor activity breaks throughout the day to help your child stay healthy and focused. Those stretch and dance breaks, the teachers amaze me in that virtual environment, and they're dancing and singing and doing all kinds of stuff and getting up and stretching. It's important. And I have to remember that too. I'm working virtually from home and I'll find myself sitting down. I'm like, wow, I have not moved for an hour and a half. That's not healthy. I need to get up. I need to move. I need to walk around the house, right? We also want to help our child stay socially connected. Dr. Morris said this, and it's incredibly important. Social distancing does not mean social isolation. There are ways to stay connected, and we have to be creative, and we have to follow our public health orders, but there are ways to stay connected with our family and our loved ones. That social connectedness improves children's chances of resiliency. We can reach out to family and friends via phone or video chats. We can do drive-bys. We did one the other day to our friend's house, and we drove by and screamed out the window and waved. Write cards or letters. I know that feels like really old school, but it's kind of awesome to get a letter in the mail, right? Or write a card and send that to somebody who we may not be able to video chat with. So really thinking about ways that we can stay connected, and also remembering that we need to stay connected within the social connection within our household as well, right? Instead of getting buried in technology, buried in our phones, buried in the TV, whatever it is, it's staying connected within each other as well, staying connected with our children. Next slide. How can kids help themselves? Kids are amazing. They're smart. Sometimes we underestimate them. And again, we're the adult, we have to come in and fix it, right? They're pretty awesome. And a lot of times there's a lot of things that we can teach our kids to do themselves. Talking about their feelings and making that an okay thing to do, right? We're decreasing stigma by doing that and making it a normal activity, that it's okay to talk about our feelings. Encourage journaling. Get kids involved in community work. Focus on the current moment. That's something they can do themselves, those grounding activities. Acknowledging feelings and getting them, especially for the little ones, to identify what those feelings are and acknowledging them, and then learning what we can do to help. And then dedicating some time alone, right? My 5-year-old will tell me, Mom, I need my space. And he'll march upstairs and come take his space, right? Because he knows he needs some time alone. You see this resource over on the right. This is one of my favorite things. It's traveled through with all of my different careers with me, and I have used it for years and years and years, and it's the 99 coping skills. This will be a resource for you on the website, and there are 99 things here that you can do for yourself. Coping skills for adults, for kids of any age. There's wonderful examples that we can give our kids and say, hey, pick what you want, pick what works for you. Because for me, listening to music may calm me down, but that may not work for somebody else. So, and listening to music may work one day, it may not work another. So we want to have lots of resources there for our kiddos as well. So this will be a resource for you that you can access. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. But remember to empower our kids that, yes, we're here to help, but they can do these things on their own as well. Next slide. All right, so we're getting into more resources, and then I know we'll open it up to the panel. couple resources here for you as well. We have the New Mexico Crisis and Access Line here for you. The New Mexico Crisis and Access Line is a crisis line for mental health for folks of any age. You do not have to be the person in crisis to call this hotline. You could be somebody who just wants resources, or somebody who has a friend who you want to know how to help, you can call. And they also have a phenomenal new app called the NM Connect app that I absolutely encourage you download. There's a QR code on your screen. If you open up the camera on your phone and you just hold your phone up to the screen, it should automatically link to that resource. And then the crisis line is there as well, 24/7, 365, access to a licensed mental health professional. They also have peer-to-peer services, and they have a text line as well. And then we've also put up here for you the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-TALK. Again, you do not have to be the person in crisis to call, 24/7, 365. And next slide. So these, we talked about an extensive list of resources. Here they are, and this doesn't even encompass it. So all of these are going to be listed on the Rio Rancho website for you to access. A lot of these, and you saw the citations throughout the presentations, were built throughout of what we talked about today. There's wonderful things in here, wonderful resources for you all to utilize. And we've also got some additional resources as well that will be listed. Sorry. Yes, that will be, I'm sorry, that will be listed, life working at home as a parent, right? That will be listed on the website. Dr. Morris, did you want to reference any of the other resources specifically?
No, I think we'll wait until we have questions and then see if things probably will come up in the questions.
Okay, next slide. Really briefly, another QR code for you. The Office of School and Adolescent Health puts out a quarterly newsletter where we put a ton of resources for folks who work with children, folks who have children, people who know children or have ever seen a child. So another QR code for you. If you want to go ahead and scan that, that'll automatically put you on the listserv, and you can get that quarterly newsletter and see what trainings we have going on, resources, or however you want to access our services in any way. We're happy to help. Next slide. And we just want to thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully our resources are helpful for you all, and just thank Rio Rancho Public Schools so much for doing this Parent University series for folks. It's incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morris and Ms. Clausen, for your presentation. I am going to stop sharing this, and we are going to bring up our panel. And I am going to start asking some questions. We have a few that have come through. Let's see here. All right. Our first question is, how do I find the magic place where I can oversee my teen without making them feel that I am spying on them?
Wow.
Question. I can initially just respond. I think it's through connection, and it's finding a mutual connection with your teen and building trust. That's way easier said than done. And I'm sure that person is going, yeah, easier said than done. I get it. But at the same time, it's finding, and sometimes you got to really dig deep, but finding that mutual connection where you can, maybe you both like basketball, maybe you both like going for drives in the car, whatever it is, finding that mutual connection where conversation becomes easier and trust becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my wood cutting trip with my grandson, and kind of the big draw was he's a teenager and learning how to use the chainsaw. So I had something to offer, that drew him out there. And then there was time. And Shana mentioned this too, that there's no way to shortcut that, really, is that you do have to put some time into it. And so maybe be patient with yourself and with your team, that it could take some time, not going directly to that point of, who are you really messaging with on Snapchat or whatever. And that's what you really want to know. What are you saying? But don't go there right away. have other conversations, and then come around. And I think another thing to really model for teens is that the stuff that comes to us through our phones, um, it's not a substitute for talking to each other. And one way to kind of show that is like we can talk about to each other about the stuff that's on our phones. And so my wife and I will model that for the kids. Like we'll have something on our phone, like, wow, did you see this? You know, there were these giant storms in Iowa. And so we start talking about the giant storms in Iowa that flattened all the corn. And then we watch a couple of videos and it's like, okay, so we can talk about things that we get on our phone. And then, you know, that may be able to broaden out over time, that there's some other things they're getting through their phone and through all their connections that you'd like them to share a little more with you. And so maybe you come around to that after a while.
I would also just reiterate that I have a 15-year-old son who's a 10th grader in high school. And I think the biggest thing for me is the communication with him, that constant trying to get him to communicate, because it's, you know, they don't want to communicate, but just baby steps and just constantly, and he comes around, you know, at first he doesn't want to, but then he thinks about it and then he comes back and he starts talking to me. And so I think when that happens, you have to open that door and keep talking to them, and they'll come back.
Great. Janice, Vicki, do you have anything to add?
Here we go. I keep forgetting about the mute button. So actually I had a great analogy today because I had a young student and she said something to her mom, you know, she didn't want her mom checking on her in terms of grades. And I have seniors this year, and so they're working on their independence. And I asked the young lady what was the first thing she did when she got into her car to drive away, and you know, she had to check on her dashboard. And she said, well, I'm checking the gas. And I said, yeah, but what if you just put in gas a couple days ago? And well, I'm still checking. And I said, well, that's what your parents are doing, honey. They're just checking to see if you have gas. I said, that's it. They're not saying you're doing horrible things. They're just checking, and it's their way of reassuring themselves that you're on track. They're just checking the gas. You know, you're with your mom, give her a break. She's had you for a long time. She's checking the gas. And that kind of took it off as my mom is, you know, grilling on me, and just, she's checking the gas. It's just reassuring. And that kind of, I hope, helped remind the parent and the child that it's not, I'm out looking to see if you're doing something wrong. I'm just reassuring myself as the adult that you're on track.
Great. Thank you. All right. Our next question. Is it a good idea to ask my child's friends if my child has confided any emotional issues to them?
That's kind of a tough one, huh? You know, I think, first of all, it sort of depends on the relationship amongst you all. So if there's time, you know, if there's sort of a group and kids are at your house or whatever, you know, and y'all are used to interacting, then I think it's okay sometimes to check in and say, you know, how do you think he's doing? Or, you know, I noticed something I'm a little concerned about. Did you notice anything? But keep that kind of short and simple, because you don't want to spend a lot of time talking about somebody who's not there. Like, that's just not cool in any setting, right? So apply that in this situation. So it'd be okay to check in and say, oh, okay, you know, and then maybe identify an action like, well, I'll talk more to her about it. So keep it short and simple. If the relationship is there, would be maybe my, in a nutshell, idea. What do you guys think?
This is Shana. I agree. I think it depends on the relationship that you have with your child and with your child's friends and what that dynamic looks like. At the same time, I think it also depends on the severity of the situation. So, for example, if you are worried that your child may be self-harming in a certain way or possibly even suicidal, my opinion as a suicide prevention instructor, all bets are off at that point. You contact who you need to contact. And communicate. And I think, one of the things Dr. Moore said too is incredibly important, is keep it action oriented. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk to them about that. And again, a reminder, if you're in that type of crisis situation, we want to react in a different way, not leave that individual alone, all of those things. But in reference to talking to our children's friends in a non-crisis situation, I think it really depends on the situation, because that can backfire. That can ruin the relationship with your child. And well, maybe not ruin, that's egregious, but, damage that relationship with your child. And, communicate with your child about that and say, I'm worried. And I reached out to so-and-so, because it's okay if you talk to them. I just want to know that you're talking to somebody, right? Tana said it, communication is incredibly important, right? I love the analogy of checking the gas, right? I want to check that you're okay. And if you're talking to your friend about that, great. But I want to make sure you have the resources that you need if you're not feeling okay. And so I would just remember those things and make sure that we want our children to have open communication with us. We need to have equally open communication appropriately with them as well. So making sure that we're letting them know that, hey, I reached out and talked to that person. And, the last thing I have to say on this, and also with the last question, is, we want to be careful not to should on people. You should do this. You really should do that, right? It blocks off communication, right? And as a parent, we want to tell them what they should do, right? Or as a guardian, or what our role is. So be careful to not do that, and make suggestions, right? Help them, guide them through communication without doing the, you should do this, right?
Great. Thank you so much. So we've heard a lot lately in the media, and we hear it from parents as well at the school district, this idea that anxiety right now is super high for students. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to offer this class this evening. But we've also heard from some parents where they feel like they've gotten to the point where they just don't know what to do anymore. And maybe they followed some of those tips and stuff that we went through tonight. But when a parent reaches a point where they just don't know what to do, and Dr. Morris, I reached out to you the other day on one, when they just don't know what to do anymore, what is the best resource for them? What can they do? What's available at the schools? What's available in the community? What are those things that we can help our parents with?
I can speak from the statewide level and then pass it off to Dr. Morris and Tana to talk about Rancho and school resources. From the statewide level, I encourage every single person in my personal life, my professional life, to put the New Mexico Crisis and Access Line number in their phone. Download the app and put the number in your phone, because you never know when you're going to use it. And I've had people tell me in trainings and professional environments, well, don't I have to be suicidal to call? No. A mental health emergency comes in many different shapes and forms. Put that number in your phone, download that app, and have it there, because sometimes those breaking points come at 2 a.m., right? When we may not have those other services available. And that is an immediate link to help. One of the other great things about the New Mexico Crisis and Access Line is their library of resources is incredible. And so they'll ask you, okay, what part of the state are you in? What town are you in? What type of resource are you looking for? And they'll help you get to that resource. They'll even help you make an appointment if that's what you like, or whether you would like to do some type of support group or parent group or whatever it is, all of that. It's really wonderful access to resources as well. So from a statewide perspective, I would absolutely lead you to put that number in your phone and download that app.
Yeah. They do have a texting, a special line for texting as well. So there's that available. Either you can use the app for that, but there is also just a number, and you can just start texting to that number. So that's a good way to just start that. And they call it the New Mexico Crisis and Access Line. So it's not only about crisis, it's really about access to the care and supports that might be needed. And so it's a great, great place to start, whether it is truly a crisis situation or whether it's just a time when you're very concerned and wanting to try to figure out what to do. It's a great resource. Locally, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is in the things we put up on the website, there's the information for our clinic, UNM Behavioral Health Clinic in Rio Rancho. There's also a detailed list of other local Rio Rancho resources. We've got actually pretty good resources for counseling and therapy in Rio Rancho. There's a number of providers that are on that list. Also some good resources not far away in Albuquerque, sort of in the northern part of town, across the bridge. So the thing about counseling is that I like to emphasize is it's not a big deep mystery where you have to go back necessarily and talk about your entire life. There are very specific skills and tools that can help a person who's feeling stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, depressed. We really do focus, as we've been talking about, on behavior and things you can do to help yourself feel better. We also focus on the things you tell yourself, the way that you think about things, how do you solve problems. And, we don't get an instruction manual on problem solving. And so therapy and counseling often is focused on those kinds of pragmatic things. And so I think when you're talking to your child, if you're trying to encourage them to give that a try, just to explain it to them in that way, that could really be helpful in helping you find some ways to solve some of the things that are really bugging you and that you really maybe don't like about the way you're feeling or the way things have been going for you. It's to feel better and do better. It's what it's about, and everybody wants that.
And I would add, and hopefully Janice and Vicki can jump in, just at the school level, we might not have per se with our 42 counselors in the district as clinical, but they are there to work with our families and specifically with parents for guidance and resources. And for example, Colinas, where Janice is at, now has 2 counselors on their campus, which is just really incredible and great. And then Vicki, there's 8 counselors at Rio Rancho High School, and they all have a wealth of knowledge and have lots of resources to help families with. So I don't know if you two want to jump in and kind of give a little information as well.
I just like to ask about. So, I think one of the important roles of us as the schools is to just look for those signs that we see maybe, like they were saying earlier, the students withdrawn, their behavior is different. So that's really a chance for us to kind of get involved and say, hey, just have a conversation with that student and make sure everything's okay. And if we have concerns, to get the parents involved. So we really try to be proactive about being on top of that, especially right now with students dealing with anxiety in classrooms every day this week. And students that I know from last year, I've been noticing some differences. So, that's good information for me to kind of start asking questions and get on that right away.
So I just wanted to add that our counselors are available. You can reach us through email. There is also a Google form on our website that you can address that, and it'll go to the counselors or to your child's counselor. For us, the high school, because we have so many, it'll get to the specific counselor, but we are available. We definitely can connect you with resources. Sometimes we can talk you off the ledge, especially I know having now that we're working with seniors again, and parents are stressed, and there's a lot of, so sometimes we can just talking it through, talking with the students, because the students, I'm happy to say that I've been able to connect when the parents are around, the students are around, so I know that they're up, and we can just walk through it, and if we can't find the solution or whatever, we certainly have resources that we are more than willing to share.
Thank you. And I wanted to reiterate too, I think Janice was saying the same thing. Her mic was a little scratchy, but the same thing, like reaching out if there's a question and having the student call or the parents call, that the counselors are there to, provide those resources and there to help, and they want to be proactive and move quickly on anything. And you can shake your head if I captured that, Janice, but I believe that's what Janice said. So I want to make sure everyone caught that. All right, we are almost out of time. I am going to ask a couple more questions. The next question is, should video gaming be limited for a child if they have already been online for school during the day?
So, and now I'm trying to pull up the data on the top of my head, and of course I can't right now. There is specific suggested amounts of time for virtual world, whether that's video game, whether that's online, whether that's your phone, per age throughout the day. We're in a little bit of a different situation. So part of what I would say is that be careful, because if that is an outlet for your child, we don't want to take it away completely, but we also want to monitor it and put, reasonable expectations on it, right? So if we're on for 8 hours a day in a virtual classroom, and then we jump off and we're on for another 4 hours or whatever it is in the video game, we put some other family routines in between that break it up. I wish I could remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, and I can't, but that's an easy Google question, or maybe Dr. Morris knows. But I absolutely would encourage you to look at that, but also don't just rip the rug out either, because that can be a huge coping skill that is really helpful in moderation. Same thing with social media. Everybody goes, social media is bad, right? Social media can have really positive impacts on youth, but it's all about how they interpret what they're doing on social media. Same thing with a video game. So it's about talking and having that communication, highlighting what Tana said. It's extremely important, having that communication with your youth, whether it's about a video game or social media, about how they're taking in that information. Are you posting pictures just to see how many likes you can get? Are you doing this group interactive video gaming? I sound like I know what I'm talking about. I totally don't know at all. Are you doing this group interactive video game just so you can, get to somebody else or whatever it is? It's about how we're internalizing that information.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Shane is saying, that if that is an important outlet, an important form of recreation for a young person, then you don't want to take that away per se, but have that conversation with them and say, now you're spending a lot of time on screens because you have to for school, and so maybe let's rethink this a little bit, that it's not that we're going to eliminate the video gaming because you like that and it's fun for you, but maybe we do need to reduce that and do something else to get up and get away from the screen. So not eliminate it, but perhaps trim it back a little bit and have that conversation, figure out a plan that makes sense. And it is an easy Google to look at some of the limits, but the recommended limits are quite low, and not going to be realistic given the fact that the child's spending hours a day online just for school.
Well, I'm thinking how much we can role model as the adults that are home with or a lot of us are home. And I think we can be the role model, because I know I'm spending my whole day in front of the computer. So if I can get up, and I don't have anyone at home with me, but if I can get up and say, okay, it's kind of like a little break and let's both go out, and there's your connecting time that you have to build some communication. And, that's where you both walk away from the computer for a few minutes together and then come build it in. So you can actually kind of join. That's a great time to join with your child on how to deconnect or disconnect from the computer and walk away. And then, because usually we'll go home, when we turn off our computers, then we go in front of the TV set to watch whatever. Maybe we can role model that as the adult and go outside to garden or go run up and down the street. I don't know, whatever you do, but we can also be that role model. And if we're doing it slowly, hopefully the kids will join us.
Great, thank you. And so we are almost out of time. My very last question is there anything that any of you would like to add before we wrap up?
I just want to remind everyone that we are doing the absolute best we can every single day, in our roles with the school, in our roles as parents, as community members, whatever our role is. And I'm reminding myself at the same time, we are in unprecedented times, and we are doing the absolute best. And sometimes the best for me is that I got out of bed and I changed my clothes into something different that I wore to bed. And that's okay. Right. And, we have to remember to, and Janice just put this in the chat box and I'm going to read it for her because I know her audio is bad. We want to remember to be patient and flexible with ourselves and with our kids. That is wonderful advice, right? So we just need to remember that celebrate the successes, even when they feel small, they're huge. So we need to take care of ourselves, take care of our kids, and treat everybody with a gentle heart.
And I would add from the district is just don't worry about reaching out to our counselors because they want to talk to you. They are there for you, and don't feel that there's any question that might be silly because they want to help. They want to be able to support you. They want to be able to give you guidance, and they are there and waiting. And so please use our counselors as a resource in the district.
I would add, for those of you who have a child who you're very concerned about and where you're thinking, okay, coping and wellness is all well and good, but I think we might already be past that point. We did put up some information on the webpage about anxiety disorders, more detail about specific disorders and about treatment and what treatment looks like and how that works. And I talked just a little bit about that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Then that from there may give you ideas about where you want to go next in terms of seeking some more structured help for your child. A great place to start is with your primary care physician. If you have one, if you don't have one, you can try to get one, although that can be a long wait. But that's a great place to start, just with a doctor visit. And that's an easy reach for most kids. It's like, oh, you're not feeling good. Why don't we just go get a checkup, right? That's much easier to do than let's try therapy, right? That's a big step for a lot of people. So start with that easy step and then kind of take it in those small steps. But start moving forward. And, if you are really concerned and thinking about, okay, we've got a serious problem. Can I educate myself a little bit about what that really might be? What are the things that can be done about that? Because one of the things about anxiety is that it's very, very treatable. There's lots of ways to improve it. It doesn't have to involve medications, although that's one option. But with young people, that's not where we're going to go first, really, ever. There's a lot that you can do. I did include also in the documents a thing about deep breathing, and it's designed for young people. Even for very young kids, you could read it through first and then kind of explain it to your child. It has a dinosaur, it has a person being chased. It's fun, and a nice breathing technique that anybody, kids of all ages, including us big kids, can use. So check that out as well, for a very specific thing that can start to take the edge off of anxiety and help anyone to then think about the next step.
I think I'll print that out and take it home with me tonight and practice my breathing.
It's a good one. Triangle breathing.
Right. Well, I just really want to thank the Department of Health and Shayna Clausen, and then our University of New Mexico and Dr. Chris Morris, clinical psychologist, for joining us this evening and presenting some very, very valuable information. Thank you to our panelists as well, Tana Burgos, Vicki Valles-Mora, and Janice Spratt, for joining us and helping us respond to questions. We talked about multiple resources this evening. All of those resources that have been shared with us by the Department of Health and UNM Health Sciences will be provided on our website, where you find the information on the Parent University classes. So next to this class where we post this video from tonight's presentation, we'll also include all of those resources so you have access to those. We wanted to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you again to our panelists and our presenters, and we'll see everyone next time. Good night.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.